it's Ty's birthday today.
Yeah. Thanks, man.
Thanks, Bring it in, dude. Bring it in. Bring it in for this one.
Thanks, man. Appreciate that.
We just got to celebrate with the early morning family breakfast at Denny's.
It's the most random thing ever. I don't think I've eaten there since, I think I went to a football game in Denver about 10 or 12 years ago. That's the last time I ate there. And for some reason on my birthday, Tuesday morning at 6:30 a.m., that's where we ended up.
Hit it, you know.
So, yeah.
Get that, what did you get, a scrambler?
I got you got some type of a slam because everything's a slam there.
Slam burger, baby.
Yeah.
Kids are going to be jacked on chocolate pancakes and milkshakes.
All day long. Start them off with a milkshake.
Yeah. Poor Chelsea.
So, no kidding.
No. So the question that I wanted to hit up today, I want to make sure I get the phrasing right on this. Are men scared of affection with other men?
With other men. The struggle of being masculine, needing a team, but not knowing how to actually connect. Yeah. That's a great topic for today. It's funny you bring this up today. I had the opportunity to go and speak at a retreat. An essay group somewhere up in a different state asked me to come and speak because they were doing a little get-together retreat with each other, and close to where we live here. And I went up there, and when I walked in, it was like this group of men, like 6 men, that had gotten together from their group, from their essay group, but they wanted something more than what the group was providing for them. And it was really interesting to watch the interaction. I think part of it was me just showing up and making it awkward too. But it was like, you could tell that these men really do want connection with each other. But even at the dinner table before we did the presentation, it was just difficult to elicit a conversation that felt really deeply connecting.
Okay,
and I started thinking about that and going here we live in a world, especially in the recovery world, where we're preaching all the time, connect. You need a team. And the way you build a team is you build your friends, and then from your friends you get closer friends, and then you get more vulnerable and you share more and more, and eventually you have a few people in your inner circle. And I think for men, even more so than women, that process often is really, really difficult. It's really scary. It almost feels like you're acting against your masculinity if you build relationships with other men where there's a deep level of vulnerability, Yeah,
I was thinking about, there were a couple of things that happened this last week that kind of put this in my mind, and one of the stories that I wanted to bring up that popped into my head was when you entered into our family. We got uncles that are like the manliest of men, right? And
they run an oil field company. They're just they're kind of from also in the country, cowboy,
Western.
Just Western style, And I started showing up, and the first thing I did, because this is the family I grew up in, is I got these Greek roots, really highly physical, and first thing I started doing was hugging your uncles. Hey, nice to meet you, Uncle Mike or Uncle Corey or whatever, and I go give them a hug, and every time I give them a hug, they just go stiff as a board, and you could almost feel them looking through me at whoever else was around, what's this guy doing? And then I got to the point where
surface area.
It's whoa, we don't hug like that. We don't show that kind of affection. They go really stiff. It got to be where it was almost a game. I'd purposely look forward to giving me a hug just to watch them stiffen up. But then over the years, it got to be where we got pretty familiar with each other. And I think one of them even asked Rhiannon, my wife, the second time I came down, I think they even asked her, said, "Hey, is he gay?" Because they just figured that I was more affectionate than most men they'd ever known,
I love that story. Yeah. No, I think the reason I was thinking about it is I've got a a therapist that I've been meeting with, I think maybe I've referenced him before, but Manny, and he's a soft-hearted guy, just the same as myself, and there's been conversations that we've had where it's almost like revealed elements in our past where we did extra work to make it look like we were too tough for love. Yeah. It's like we didn't need that. And he grew up in kind of an interesting situation where he didn't have a father figure. His mom was taking him around to these different places, living with different people, and the masculine side was not just like off, it was totally void. And as a consequence, what he learned was basically from the streets. He's half Mexican, half German, and he gravitated towards the Mexican side, and he ended up in some pretty rough places as a consequence, and got into boxing, and he was really good at fighting. And so that was kind of the facade, though, was I'm a fighter.
That's right? What I do.
So that's the extent of it, is I'm a fighter. Yeah. And I can't show love or affection for another man, because that would be like the chink in the armor.
It would almost show weakness in some way.
Yeah. Where we don't view it as weakness, especially if it's done in a healthy and thoughtful way. But I guess how do you see it in our world, like the void, and how does it impact men?
Well, I think it goes, I actually think it stretches further than just the impacting men. I think the struggle that we see with so many men today, I think we've been kind of taught and had it drilled into us to shut off certain kinds of feelings, and we readily agree to it because those feelings are vulnerable and they don't feel good anyway, right?
Yeah, right.
And so what does it mean to be a man, right? Like if you're a man, it means you're strong, it means you're stoic, it means all of those things. And the truth is that some of those things are like masculine traits, right? But there's a lot of other ways to define strong. And, when I look at like some of the groups that I work with right now, these guys are building a brotherhood with each other where they are vulnerable with each other. They're putting their hearts on the line in front of each other. I think I see real strength there, even though they feel weak. But we live in a world where that can be very easily misused, and we can be hurt by those things, right?
Right, yeah.
I think you were a tender-hearted kid, so was I growing up. What was it like when you actually, how was it received when you'd show up in a tender-hearted kind of a way, or in a softer kind of a way, or when you'd show some kind of emotion? I know for me, I was always made fun of because I'm the crier, right? Yeah. Like I cry all the time, and that always kind of got tied into, in some ways, at least the way that I interpreted it as a kid, as some type of a weakness, right? That was seen as not masculine. And so I think we live in a world where it's hard, because this is two-edged sword, is there are masculine traits that are good, that do look strong and stoic, but it doesn't mean that there's not a wider bandwidth of what real masculinity is that doesn't include the ability to be connected to your heart and to be connected with a bunch of other men. Like, that's where I think I see the men in our world going completely off the rails, is we are all alone.
Yeah.
we all face this world completely on our own. I'm thinking of, like, remember we took a road trip with another one of our friends up to Idaho to go fishing, and we were talking, like sharing, you and I were sharing back and forth like our stories, and like we were getting pretty dang vulnerable. And I think we turned to him, this other friend, and we're like, hey, tell us your story. And then he was like, kind of like clammed up, and then he's like, I'm an open book, I'll talk about whatever you want to. And then we started asking him questions, and then we stopped for like gas or something, and he shut down and didn't say anything else.
I remember that, because I mean, you could feel it in the air that his butt cheeks were clenched.
He just pinched tight and was like, oh, I know I'm supposed to say that I'm an open vulnerable, like I'm an open book, but there's no way in hell I'm gonna say anything right now. Like, because it's just too hard. It's just too vulnerable, And but for good reason, like he was probably raised in the same world and in some of the same ways that all of us were. And it feels like a real uphill battle. I mean, even for me personally. I'm the same way. Like, it still to this day feels like an uphill battle to open myself up, and in some ways even more so with other men than with, like, say, my wife or with a woman.
Yeah.
It's just the way that it is for me.
Yeah. There was a scripture in John that I was reading this last week that I want to pull up real quick, because it's kind of it's the first time I'd ever read it and really thought about this type of relationship between Jesus and another man. And so it's in John 13, and this is when Jesus had just gotten done washing everyone's feet. Right,
Mm-hmm.
so that's pretty vulnerable.
Yeah.
Not just being the washer, but the receiver of another man touching your feet. Right,
Yeah.
that's already in my head. I'm like,
whoa,
no, hey,
yeah.
hey. And I've got that club
Yeah.
foot, so I'm like, it's even weirder for that to be
Yeah.
focused on. And then what happens is Jesus identifies his betrayer. Like, he doesn't just say, hey, one of you is going to betray me. He says, the guy that I give this bread to, that's the guy. Yeah. And I mean, how awkward would that have, terrible would that have been? But before he does that, before he actually gives the bread, and he says, one of you is going to betray me, there's a scripture that really stood out to me. And it says, now there was one leaning on Jesus' bosom, one of his disciples, whom Jesus loved. And then Simon Peter therefore beckoned to him that he should ask who it should be of whom he spake. Who's the betrayer, right? He then, lying on Jesus' breast, saith unto him, Lord, who is it? That's pretty close proximity. If you think about that, like, your bosom is your chest.
Yeah.
You're like, that's the core. Like, maybe one of the most vulnerable places you have on your body is essentially everything in the front right here,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
The belly, your genitals, like all that. And to have another man embrace you in that way, essentially this, right?
Yeah.
Head on the chest. Like, I'm sure that felt a little weird,
Yeah.
right? But in that scenario, that was affection that was true and good and wholesome. And I'm sure Jesus wasn't like, ugh, get off me. What are you doing?
I imagine maybe giving him a hug.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But it was the first time that I'd ever read that scripture and thought about the disciples. Is that kind of, I knew they were a brotherhood of some form, right? Like, they had to be to an extent. But to have that sign, that physical affection take place, was really surprising to me. And then when I was talking to my therapist about it, he said, yeah, and Judas betrayed Christ with a kiss.
Yeah.
I mean, even the different elements there, it's like, I don't know. I look back at that some of that stuff, and I think, oh, I go to lengths to kind of keep a distance from people, because I don't. It's like the dichotomy between a hard, something hard and something soft, and I don't want to be the thing that's soft.
Yeah. I'm thinking about your scriptures too that you just shared, and how isn't maybe that just painted the picture of the distinguishment between the two, where Christ could be hugging one of his beloved disciples, and they had a level of intimacy, meaning friendship and connection, that allowed for that. And at the same time, that's the modality that Judas used to betray Christ. I actually think that maybe that's tapping into something, that vulnerability like that is necessary for connection, for wholehearted living, for living a Christ-like life, so to speak, at the same time that it's risky. Like,
Yeah.
and it makes sense why so many people struggle to connect, because they have to come to accept that the risk is a necessary part of the life that they were designed to live. And that risk comes with pain sometimes, but it also comes with a massive payout when it's done properly.
Yeah.
And I kind of come back to I'm thinking about one of my groups in particular right now, right now in my Wednesday night group. The guys have just developed such a culture of brotherhood with each other that they do hug each other when they see each other, that they share with one another their successes and their failures, and they love each other through that, and they support each other, and they challenge each other to get better. But there is a level of intimacy there that I don't see in many other places with men, and I think it's come from this group throwing themselves into a process, being willing to develop a friendship that's outside of just the group they come to, and they've gotten to where they genuinely love each other. They're not just guys going to talk about a problem every week.
Right, yeah.
You know, it's really, really cool. And, you know, I was thinking too about what you said about that part of the body. We call this the erogenous zone, which is the front side of the body, and it's the most vulnerable part of us, right? Physiologically it is. Even as far as physical touch goes, it's like one of the most sensitive parts of us too. It makes sense that symbolism of being right there with Christ means something, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's an interesting thought. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, so earlier you had kind of mentioned anytime you showed up in a tender way as a kid, how it was received, right? And I was thinking in my mind some of those examples from my own life and how that's kind of taught me to behave, right? So there were times where I was called a wuss, a sissy, lots of different things. Sure. And for whatever reason, the one that stood out to me was the times that I was ever called gay. Mm-hmm. And this isn't like a statement on gay being right or wrong or anything like that, but just in my reality, it wasn't accurate. And I remember whenever I would get called that, it would be really frustrating and really like disheartening or something kind of equating that. And I see that as maybe being one of the components of why men are so scared to show affection. There was a Marvel series, it's like the Falcon and the Winter Soldier that was on Disney Plus, and it's these two superheroes that are growing a closer relationship with each other and kind of developing this intimacy. And there was some feedback. People were coming up. It's called shipping. Mm-hmm. It's basically when you fantasize about what their relationship might be. And a lot of people were saying, well, this is naturally like they're gay. Mm-hmm. And the actor that played the Falcon said, it's a struggle that in this world men can't just have affection for each other.
Yeah.
And
that it's assumed that it's only and always that way.
Yeah, that's the only direction that it can head. And I think for me that's maybe one of the components where I've kind of started developing relationships with other people, and as that comes, we start to grow closer. I recognize but I don't want to be misclassified, and I also do want that proximity and that friendship, though.
Yes.
So I think that's another element that at least has impacted me in my own life. Where, and like I was saying, this isn't anything about it being right or wrong or anything about gay, but it's more so misclassification and being called something that maybe you're not.
Yeah. Well, and feeling like, because you don't necessarily feel like you're that way, but those attributes have been assigned to you.
Yeah.
Then the question and the struggle, and then even maybe the desire to discount those natural traits inside of you that are actually good, healthy traits inside of you, right? I think that's been the battle. And as we've gotten older, I think you and I kind of relate to each other because we both have kind of a tender, soft side.
Yeah.
We still get made fun of by other people we work with because of that. But it's like, I think that actually, the more that we've done our own kind of growing and work, I'm more self-assured in going, it's okay for me to be an emotional male.
Yeah.
Right? And I can be an emotional heterosexual male, and that's okay too. And I'm going to hug my uncles from New Mexico, and that's okay. and
and they're gonna be uncomfortable.
and they're going to steal. But what's funny is over that is that over the years, it's kind of gotten to the point where they still don't want to solicit the hug, but they're like that kid that like is waiting for you to give them a hug. They just don't want to ask for it.
They're just over in the corner.
Every time I see them, they're kind of like leaning in there and kind of like almost have their arm ready, but not quite ready. And then when I go get, you can tell they're like, oh yeah, that was good, Like, so that's a shout out to you, Mike and Corey. Love you guys. So,
so good. Yeah. Last story I want to bring up, unless you have anything else, but is and I would just want to showcase this every opportunity that I get. Is the story about your father and how he's Greek and your brothers and
Oh yeah, you want to tell that story?
No, I want you to tell that story. I love that story.
Yeah, so you obviously know we got some Greek in our background, and for some reason I think right now I'm like a 16th Greek. Which would make my dad like an 8th or a quarter or something.
Not a lot.
Not a lot, but enough for my dad to take great pride in that. So, and part of the Greek culture is that my dad growing up, every time I'd see him, like when I'd get like back from like a high school basketball game, or when I went to college, every time I'd come home, every time I see my dad, he comes up and he gives you a kiss on the lips and then gives you a hug. He's like, oh, I'm so excited to see you, like this and that and the other. Well, it gets years into it. I'm into my marriage now, several years. My brothers, Brandon and Rex, my brothers go to my dad and they're like, hey Dad, you know that thing that you do with us where you give us a kiss every time you see us? We don't necessarily like that. We don't want to do that anymore. But you know what? Tyler loves it. So you can still do it with Tyler, but just don't do it with us anymore. And
just threw you right under the bus.
So to this day, that was probably maybe 6, 7, 8 years ago. To this day, I'm still the only one in my family that when my dad sees me, he kisses on the lips, and it's great. It's fine. even though Brandon and Rex have opted out. So
I just love that about your brothers.
Yeah.
They totally do that too. So
that's totally something they would do too.
Great.
Which, in a way, is its own form of masculine intimacy, too.
Yeah.
He's joking around, and that's what I was thinking about with Christ, too. Like, you think about how he and his disciples, his core brotherhood really operated with each other, and that they had to have some times messing around with each other.
Oh, yeah.
Like, thinking about Christ when he's, like, walking down the beach, he's like, hey, fellas, like, throw the nets on the other side, like joking around. I think he was like messing with them, like, yeah, just toss them on the other side, and then boom, they pull in all these fish, like, that kind of stuff. Or, I don't think it was as serious and as meek and as humble as, everyone reads the Bible to be, or as Christianity makes it out to be. I actually think there was full-on brotherhood, and those guys, they went through severe adversity together, and there had to be toughness to match whatever the connection was that they had with each other. Yeah. It took both, and I think that's where toxic masculinity gets in the way, is it doesn't allow for the other side. It only stays on the one side of the toughness, and it doesn't actually allow for the full bandwidth of what it means to actually be intimate and vulnerable and to actually show genuine care and concern. So,
man, yeah.
Well,
yeah.
You're a man, Chase.
You're the man. I love you, Ty.
Love you too.
We had to do that.
All right, that was a must do. So.